Okay, so everyone, greetings and greetings to everyone who's watching us online. This is the roundtable about what's happening with defense procurement. The co-organizers of the roundtable are NAKO, State Watch, and Defense Procurement Reform Project. And today we have a lot of people who directly deal with defense and defense procurement issues. Unfortunately, the situation in terms of implementation of government procurement program is not very good, and this program is not performing for 2 years already. And on this background, the stance of the MOD is quite interesting, and the commander-in-chief, who act like nothing serious is happening, like business as usual. And I hope that it will be very interesting for all of us to hear people who are directly involved in DPP, in Defense Procurement Program, involved in its drafting and implementation. And I will remind all of the speakers that you have 7 minutes per. We have very limited time, and we will start with Roman Costenka, Secretary of the Parliamentary Committee for National Security, Defense and Intelligence. Hello, thank you so much for inviting me. Are we going to discuss questions from the agenda? Or I think that in the very beginning you can just tell us how you understand the situation, what's your vision, and then if the colleagues have questions, they will ask those questions. And then we will hear the representatives from the Ministry of Defense. Okay, thank you so much. Well, let me just say a couple of words about the Defense Procurement Bill, which was drafted in the committee. We worked together with the MOD and the experts, and when we were developing and drafting this bill, we spent a lot of productive and effective time. And we also want to have a similar approach to drafting of the SBU law. We applied a lot of efforts. Why? Because we actually want to give direction to the MOD so that they could do planning, so that they could do procurement and midterm and long-term planning. Because there is one problem that we face when a new Minister of Defense comes in, or other procurers, because of the political situation, because of unstable institutions, and then there are many other things. But people somehow are not looking 10 years ahead or 15 years ahead. If you will approach the MOD and ask, and it also is related to the defense complex, so if you ask them what exactly they will use to fight in 20 years, they will not be able to give you an answer. But that is the information that we have to base ourselves on. So we have been discussing midterm and long-term planning, then effective use of public funds. The Ministry of Defense can say as much as they can about good performance rates of the DPP, but the committee has its own stance. What do we understand? Performing DPP. Is this about spending of funds, or is this about buying equipment needed by the armed forces? And of course, this law aims at satisfying the needs of the armed forces instead of just spending funds and just saying that, look, we spent. That means that the program had good performance. But on many occasions the MOD would approach us and renegotiate the DPP. It's been so many times. In the beginning of the year there were different items in the DPP, and then at the end we are procuring something else. You know, they talk about airplanes first, then they talk about guns, and then they try to see what the defense complex can produce, and then they adapt. And we are talking about planning problems. So this bill, first and foremost, is a progressive document. And this document is very important for our country. Now, what do we see after all? We see that this document is not working. and it's not working because, there are different ministries involved, the MOD, the Ministry of Strategic Industries, and they failed to come up with bylaws and regulations which do not implement the law. So right now we have a non-working old law, and we also have a new law which is not working as well. So what do we do about this? Then secondly, let me tell you about what's happening in terms of performance of the DPP and its implementation. The information is public, it's not secret. And I submitted inquiries to the MOD and also to Ukroboronprom. I was asking about the number of contracts that they have concluded in line with the DPP this year. So we are at 6-month period in the process of state defense procurement, and we know very well how much companies are producing and how much are they spending, and we understand that in 6 months you can only build something very basic, something very primitive, some low tech, or you can actually use something that's been in the warehouses sitting for years. So we received 2 responses, one from MOD, one from Ukroboronprom, and the MOD says that in 6 months they signed only 1 contract. So, and it's a good question to ask, how did they sign it? Under which law? Ukroboronprom said that they don't have any contract signed. And we understand why, because there is no register. And also bylaws and regulations are not working. Allow me to clarify something. So Ukroboronprom 0 contracts, right, in 2021. That is the official response. And also, apart from those official responses, we talk to people. We know those people. We know about the problems. So 0 contracts. And allow me to remind you that we are a country at war. The country that needs these weapons badly. And let's move on. We have to understand very well what is supposed to happen next. Ukroboronprom is supposed to adapt to the new law on defense procurement. They are supposed to adapt to new challenges which we will have. So we are talking about long-term planning. When the MOD says that in 10 years and I'm just, coming up with things, but let's say they claim that we will have modern Navy and Air Force in 10 years. Then Ukroboronprom, keeping this in mind, is supposed to do all possible to reform itself. Now we have a different situation. We have actual companies of Ukroboronprom which are manufacturing items with 60s or 70s design from the previous century. They produce items which are not in line with the demands of today. We just don't have the capability of producing something new, and we don't have the technology, and the army is not procuring those things. They don't request any new production. So let's say we have this bill, and there were other questions, right? And on the agenda about the secrecy and the classified nature of things, and I will be able to respond to that as well. But speaking about right now, we have to make sure that the defense procurement bill is working. We have to develop mechanisms and institutions. We have to learn how to plan in midterm and long-term perspective. The country needs to know where we are going. And this also means cooperation with Ukroboronprom, and we want to make sure that we have to buy from Ukroboronprom. We understand that we have to support the economy, but on the other hand, we have to support the armed forces. We have to ask what they need. If Ukroboronprom cannot meet the request, we have to be able to buy things elsewhere. And the law is exactly about this. We have the Air and Space Agency of Ukraine. So we have to understand that if this country needs a satellite, then we are not supposed to wait until Ukraine makes that satellite. It's good, of course, to make a satellite, launch it in space, and get benefits from it. We need that, but we need that today. And that means that we have to launch a satellite in space right now, and that needs to help our intelligence services, our military. We cannot wait when it's ready to be tested and launched. So we have to remember this. And there is a question for the MOD. We had multiple meetings. Deputy Minister Halimon and Mirouniuk came. Just Mirouniuk, by the way, is more responsible for this. So they promised mid-January, then they said mid-February, then they said March, now it's midsummer. So they promised that this law will be working. So it's a very good question, and hopefully the MOD representatives will answer this question, or someone from Ukroboronprom, because they look forward for this law to be enacted, and the armed forces as well. More than anyone, they need the equipment repaired. They need new deliveries, over $1 million worth of deliveries, and we cannot do that because of red tape, because of managers not fulfilling their duties. So thank you so much. I'm ready to answer your questions. Right, we will have a good discussion of excessive secrecy around the defense procurement. And you mentioned Mr. Halimon just now. That is the man who received a lot of criticism because of his connection to Visk Volunteer Service organization, which became a monopoly in terms of providing catering services for the armed forces. They won the bids worth of 6 billion hryvnia, a small company, and that's what we can see in the public domain. Imagine what's happening in the domain where everything is secret. This excessive secrecy around the public procurement in defense is surprising for Ukrainians and for international partners as well. Now, our expert mentioned a lot of good things, and hopefully there will be comments from the MOD. We have Olga Kulish with us today. We have Viktor Drac. So, in fact, when do you think the law will be in effect? When it will work? Hello, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for inviting us. In the letter, they said that we will be hearing recommendations from the experts. So right away, I'm going to say that we are very grateful for those recommendations. Now let's discuss organizational and admin issues. We will examine, review all the recommendations, and we will have another meeting about how to implement those recommendations and development of new decisions, new solutions. Speaking about things mentioned today, Viktor will tell you more because he is an expert in the field. Allow me to just make a quick request. Let's be very cautious and careful when we talk about secrecy, when we talk about classified nature of things, and when we talk about defense sector. Let's have less judgments and let's discuss more facts, because we want to cooperate with the public sector, we want to cooperate with experts, including international experts, and the MOD is cooperating with international experts quite a lot, specifically from the US and the UK. And everyone here is supporting the country. We all want this country to be strong and have good defense capabilities. We are in one boat, and hopefully this boat is moving in the right direction. And if it is moving in the right direction, then we will attain our expected results in long-term perspective. And I have one quick remark, and then I'm gonna give floor to Viktor. So you are saying that we do not know what exactly we're gonna use to fight the war in 30 years, but nobody on this planet knows what kind of weapons will be used in 30 years because the technology is developing very quickly. Or maybe people will be fighting wars by the power of their minds, right? Because right now we face the hybrid warfare, but nobody knows what's going to happen in the future. There is the research, and we got to engage in the research so that we are ready for things of the future. Viktor, please, you have the floor. Right, let me make a quick comment, if I may. I agree that all of us are like-minded people, and we want the Ukrainian armed forces to be combat ready. We support this, but there are 600 criminal proceedings launched last year that deal with violations in terms of implementation of our defense procurement program and theft of billions of hryvnia. So that is not in support of the defense capability process, right? I agree. But in fact, how many
court judgments you already have after those proceedings. I cannot give you any kind of stats about court judgments, but let's not really argue about the fairness of those judgments. But with all due respect to the Ukrainian judiciary, only 2% of our public has trust in the judiciary. And that is a problem. Victor, comments from you? Right. With all due respect, I agree with what you're saying, but look, when we talk about things we need to use to fight the war in 30 years, well, I'm talking about long-term planning. We gotta know what to build and we have experts in missile technology. And I am a huge proponent of that, and I think that that is something that can make our country a regional leader. And we will be able to establish good deterrence systems. So we have to already lay the foundation today so that we can have good systems in 15 years. So we gotta understand what the country will look like in 10 years. If we say that in 10 years the principal weapon will be aviation for us, then we gotta build up that aviation capability. If it's missiles, then we have to build up that capability. That's exactly what I meant. Okay, now let's hear Victor. Please turn on the mic. Right, the implementation of defense procurement programs, it's a very important question, and this question somehow got stalled. And allow me to inform you that there was a resolution adopted on the key indicators for the public procurement, defense procurement program, number 935-4, so this defense procurement program is being implemented. There are contracts signed. I apologize, Victor. You said that the defense procurement program is kind of stalled or not being implemented. Well, in fact, it's being implemented. Well, we have an MP Kostenko with us who said that, based on his inquiry, Ukroboronprom said that they have concluded 0 contracts this year, and just a few contracts were concluded by the MOD. Is this accurate information? Speaking about defense procurement, we are now implementing contracts signed in 2020. There were contracts signed. The delivery of items is happening this year, and it's happening according to the plan without any delays. So 67.8% of funds were paid according to the commitments undertaken previously. Based on the information for the first 6 months, we have delivered products worth of 3.3 million hryvnia for defense purposes. In total, the performance rates for the defense procurement are good. Everything is happening according to the plan without any delays. Right now, we are implementing new law on public procurement. And for this purpose, we developed bylaws and regulations, and they all aim at implementation of this law. These bylaws and regulations are very important, and they aim at achieving critical indicators of our Defense Procurement Plan 2021. So the final provisions of the bill say that from the day of enactment of the law and until December 31st, the procurement will be done in line with the law of Ukraine on defense procurement. So we are continuing the work while we are in the transitional period for the implementation of the new law. And starting from the new year in 2022, we will conclude contracts already in line with the new legislation. Thank you so much. Okay, Roman, let's just everyone have a chance to speak. We have somebody who launched the reform process, who is an ex-Minister of Defense. So, what can you say about things mentioned by the MOD representatives? Okay, let's just break down these numerous problems in different categories. I absolutely agree with representatives of the MOD, and when they report the facts, always, because they work very well on preparation of the materials for reports. So when the MOD is giving you information, usually that information is accurate, but it's not about that. The question is about implementation of the procurement programs. So we are talking about implementation of contracts. If the contracts are not concluded, then of course we cannot claim that the program is a failure. We can only claim that it was a failure at the end of the year. So at the end of 2021, we will be able to tell whether the procurement program for 2021 is a success or a failure. But now we can only talk about the results of the program for 2020. And nobody is trying to fool anybody. Nobody is trying to confuse anybody. We are talking about actual facts. And when in 2021, during 2021, we realized that the program is not implemented, then the program will be amended. And usually throughout the year, they make lots of amendments because of objective reasons. Things change. Someone failed the contract, or, things happen. And when the program was designed, certain things that were inserted into this program are not feasible. So they change these things. And then at the end, the money will be spent to good cause. And I think that the program will be fulfilled successfully. And we have to ask a different question. Let me clarify something for the viewers. So we are talking about the following. The technology for producing a tank is between 12 to 14 months. And right now, if not a single penny was spent to produce tanks, we can already claim that if they plan to buy new tanks next year, then it's going to be a failed program, right? But this program will be adjusted. So if they will change tanks for ammo, 1 million of ammo, then you can say that the program was successfully fulfilled. The money was spent, but not for tanks, right? And that's what's happening every year, right? But formally, nothing is being violated, and no one is gonna launch any criminal proceedings about this. The problem is a little different. There's defense procurement program is not an effective tool. It's been established back in the Soviet times, and it's a part of the planned economy. And this tool is used by just a few countries in the world, and it has nothing to do with NATO, and it has nothing to do with market economy. So when we were discussing amendments to the defense procurement, people know about this process only when there is a scandal, only when there is a problem with certain procurement and how it impacts political ratings, and the journalists raise this issue, and then they discuss it during talk shows and so on. But you can fix this situation only using a bureaucratic, thorough reform process and change. You cannot really fix things in that paradigm which exists in line with the law on defense procurement. This situation cannot be cured because it's a system. It's a system which was not designed for the time of war. It's not designed for market economy. And when Roman, with whom we work very long time, and I think he's right. So when there is no development strategy, when there are no long-term plans, that is very bad. It's not connected to any kind of modern-day systems. And the question is not about the procurement program, because we are talking about procurement program for the armed forces. And the armed forces are sending their request to the MOD, explaining what they want. The problem is different. The problem is about strategic plans, resources, and specific actions for procurement. And in this case, we've got nothing in the procurement program, and you cannot fix it. You just have to discard it and redesign the system from scratch. And that's how the defense procurement law came about, because reforming the old system makes no sense. And that is the stance of all the experts, of all the specialists who want Ukraine to be a member of NATO. And of course, we all want Ukrainian armed forces to have high-quality weapons. Now, what the problem is? The problem is quite simple. Before the president signed the law on defense procurement, they established a new ministry. And in the ministry, they do not have right now anyone who was developing this bill. They do not understand this bill. They do not really know what it is about. And we're talking about the Ministry of Strategic Industries. So they don't have competencies. They don't have the capabilities to develop the bills. Objectively, they don't have it. They were offered assistance. And Artur will join us very soon. And by the way, he is the author of the original text. So NAKO experts were offering things. And then they said, let's establish working groups and let's have a good system. But unfortunately, it didn't happen. And right now, they are trying to redesign the system. They're trying to make the system work, to make sure that it's in line with new legislation. So the law is different. The law is about a totally new system. And connecting old system and new system is not possible. They had time, 6 months, from last summer until the new year, to develop new bills. And nothing's been done over the time. And then there will be the first quarter, where things are supposed to happen. Now it's the second quarter, and they simply don't have time to do all this. So, in line with the capabilities that the ministry has and the time that they gave themselves to work on dozen bylaws and regulations, they just did not have time. And the system, in certain sense, stalled. So somehow it will be fixed, I think. And somehow they will patch the holes, and I think that by 2021, formally, they will accomplish it. But the question is different. You know, it has nothing to do with the reform process, number one. Secondly, what about 2022? In 2022, you have to have plans based on new legislation, and lack of a good vision for a new system will hit us very hard, and the problems of 2022 will escalate. Okay, if we understand everything correctly, the old system of procurement was destroyed, and the new one has not been established. Well, we did not destroy it, we just abolished the law. The new law, which started working, it's not built on the old system and its principles, because we were discussing the need of reforming the procurement system. Right. During 1 year, you said they failed to adopt all the bylaws and regulations. So let's call things as they are, because there are specific names, right? Who are we talking about? Who is that weak link? Right. So we all understand very well that there was a decision made by the NSDC. Then there was a decision made by the CMU. And then the MOD also had a role in this. And as far as I remember, and we have people here who deal with this every day, so that was the task for the Ministry of Strategic Industries. And they were supposed to establish a good working group, because there was a lot of work to be done, and the situation objectively is quite difficult. So these people are supposed to have a vision. They need to have a philosophy of the new law. Okay, let's ask Svitlana Musiiaka, right, who represents this agency. Right, Svitlana, and she agrees with ex-Minister of Defense. And did you have proposals? And did other experts have proposals to the Ministry of Strategic Industries about the reform in defense sector and also the bylaws and regulations? Of course. Yes, if we will recall what happened in the past, because we are following closely what's happening. And together with our colleagues from the civil society, we absolutely support the idea that the old system of public procurement is not in line with modern day needs, and it's not helping complete the tasks that Ukraine is facing, considering the aggression of Russia. And together with colleagues, we took part in the legislative process. We were working on the bill for defense procurement, and we offered our expert opinions in the process of legal drafting. And speaking about the defense procurement law, for this law to work effectively, we had to either update or create about 30 bylaws and regulations. And we are talking about most important ones, the basic ones. As it's been mentioned before, the law established a transitional period of 6 months. But it just happened that the line ministries, the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Strategic Industries, they could not do this timely. And a part of the documents were adopted in spring 2021. And some documents are still not adopted. So, for instance, the list of public procurers was adopted in April 2021. And of course, that is not enough time for a fully fledged start of procurement in 2021. Based on the open source information, the Line Committee of the Parliament of Ukraine reviewed the annual procurement plan for the Ministry of Defense. And this plan is not about the entire procurement process, it's only about a part of it. And based on our assessment, the work of the relevant agencies has to be stepped up. So the agency was established in summer, but they did not have enough time to fully launch the operations. They needed personnel, they needed other resources. For instance, they needed authorization to work with state secrets. So they did not have that authorization. And that means that they could not operate with classified procurement. They could not perform those kind of procurements. They had no right to do this. And in this situation, it would be logical to engage other allies, either from the expert community or government agencies or NGOs. However, that did not happen. And we see that the decision-making process in the ministry, unfortunately, is not public. Then I think that's the reason why the decisions are not perfect. You know, there's been a lot of documents prepared by the Ministry of Strategic Industries, and the anti-corruption agency criticized those decisions. And then the CMU decision on the procurement process was worked on for 1.5 months, but they were supposed to do it in 2 weeks. So they adopted the decision, but it was published only 1.5 months. Then there is another example of problems with implementation of the law. It's the situation with the e-register for the companies that are implementing government contracts. So there's a register is supposed to become a novelty for the defense procurement market. And then the functioning of the register is a precondition for closed procurement, classified procurement. So implementation of this task is not easy, and that decision was made by the CMU. So there is the Informatization Institute that is supposed to be responsible for this. But in these conditions, you know, they were supposed to develop the TOR, and then they have to come up with a list of implementing entities. All that has not been decided. All that is now a part of the decision of the administrator. From open sources, we realized that the process was stopped, and this institute failed to secure any bids in all the bidding processes where they participated. That's why we have serious doubts that the financial capability of this entity is sufficient to successfully implement this very ambitious project. And quite possibly, they will just use old developments instead of coming up with something new. And they will not be in line with new requirements for software and other things. So I'm going to mention one of the latest orders of the ministry. And they say that this Informatization and Modeling Institute already is supposed to make those registers functional, but the information for entering into the registry is supposed to be provided in printed form, in the Excel file and also on the CD. And we have serious doubts that this process is in line with modern day software development. And now we see that even the most progressive laws, the law on defense procurement, is supposed to address a lot of problems, a lot of questions. They are supposed to help us eliminate lots of problems. And without high quality implementation, we won't be able to attain the objective, which was put forward by the bill. And they were supposed to create a transparent system for supporting the military in line with international standards. And on many occasions, we discussed it with government agencies, and we joined efforts with other expert organizations, because our task is to, as much as possible, eliminate the risks and fix the situation as soon as possible. And we were supposed to do this already yesterday. And speaking about specific recommendations, we developed draft documents, we developed recommendations, and we provided that to the Ministry of Defense according to 5 important areas in public procurement, in procurement of fuel and lubricants. And there is a chance that some of these recommendations will be taken into consideration in some strategic documents. So we will continue the work, and we are confirming our readiness to support the defense procurement process. Thank you so much. Now, for those who watch us, via YouTube, you now have an opportunity to communicate with the experts. And if you have questions, please send them to us, and we will ask those questions here. Ukroboronprom is represented by the Deputy Director General, Mr. Fomenko. He is with us. Hello, welcome. Now, please tell us whether Ukroboronprom has all the capabilities and all the tools to implement defense procurement programs. Yes, we have all that. We do. Hello, everyone. Hello, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present. Allow me to start asking questions. So, what's the objective of this roundtable? What's the outcome? What's the result? What kind of decisions are we supposed to make? Because based on what I understand, we want to change the situation for the better. Right now, Roman, Andrii, and the representatives of the MOD, they all claim that the situation has stalled. The old legislation is no more. The new legislation is not in effect. So we don't have any legal grounds for signing contracts with private companies. And right now, we are saying that this resolution was adopted 2 days ago. It was made public, and they're trying to fix the situation with this resolution. And I think that the MOD has initiated this. And I hope that next week we will have good understanding whether it worked or not. Because, you know, this delaying of the procurement law and the allows to use the previous legislation, because we need to unlock the procurement program, and we need to allow the companies to work. Speaking about Ukroboronprom, for us the situation is critical in specifically in some companies, because the companies that depend on government procurers, and we are not just talking about the MOD, there are 16 other government procurers. And that is a problem for all the procurers. Some companies right now, they are idling because they don't have anything to work with. So Ukroboronprom is only working at 2/3 of capacity. So we are sending some items for export, and a few items stay in Ukraine for domestic procurers. So our export operations help protect national defense complex. So that's how we can supply Ukrainian military with all the necessary items and equipment. So the situation needs to be fixed. The sooner the better. And you're right. The technological cycle of production for most of the products is more than 3 months. So 12 months sometimes. For missiles, for instance, it's between 6 and 18 months, depending on the specific systems that we are talking about. Then the representatives of the Ministry of Defense are right. The contracts that were concluded at the end of last year, and I'd like to thank the Deputy Minister of Defense, Mr. Zahorodniuk, for this, because he actually was able to quickly adapt to the situation. He forecasted that the situation would develop like this. And then at the end of 2020, he contracted some companies. And at the end of April, we got money like Luch Design Bureau, and then some other companies, they received funding. And that actually is a good support to those companies, and it's a way to support the needs of the armed forces and other procurers. So you're right. We have to understand the development strategy. We have to understand very well where this equipment is going to, what's going to happen in 10 years. And there is a target program to develop defense procurement, and the Ministry of Defense is working on this. And then we're talking about another program to develop defense complex, because we need to understand what kind of equipment the military will need in the future. And then based on this, we modernize our production facilities, and then we produce the armaments that the armed forces will require. So also this year, we will complete the government target programs, because the situation there is critical, and that is yet another element of the defense procurement. And this, the Ministry of Strategic Industries is responsible for this element. So I don't want to point fingers, but there is somebody, some agent, some agency that is forming policy in this regard. The Ministry of Economy was doing this last year, and by December they were working on the development of defense procurement program, but then they handed it over to the Strategic Industries Ministry. So they all need assistance. And from our organization, we submitted letters with proposals, because we want our experts to participate in development of those bylaws and regulations. And those bylaws and regulations, which were adopted in March and April, they were in conflict with the provisions of the law. So those bylaws and regulations were in conflict with the main law. So the situation was collapsing. And then there is no register of implementing entities. And we had a proposal, before a new register is implemented, let them use the old register that the Ministry of Economy has until the new register is established. And the situation was not very clear. They promised that there will be a new register, but right now it's not available. And that is in conflict with the procurement plan, which was adopted by the parliamentary committee. So for us, this is a painful situation, and we can discuss it for a very long time. So let's just answer questions simply, and let's then discuss what can be done about this. Because we are implementing government procurement, and the armed forces are suffering most because they are not receiving repair services of armored vehicles, aircraft. They are not getting any new weapons designed by Luch Design Enterprise or Antonov company. They are now fulfilling some of the requests from the military. And the Ministry of Defense is one of the largest procurers, and they're trying to fix the situation. They're trying to fix the problem. Right, you are saying that you and the MOD gave proposals, and NAKO was giving proposals, and Pereverziev is now ready to fight. And there are so many proposals. Many of them are very smart proposals. And somehow they're not working. They are not accepting them. So who are those proud boys and girls who do not want to accept your proposals, your recommendations? I just wanted to add, there is another part to this problem. In 2019, our partners from abroad who are giving us help in the shape of millions of dollars, they said that this law was a priority for Euro-Atlantic integration and for unlocking Euro-national aid. So the law was adopted, they welcomed it, and they unlocked the aid. Now we have this second condition that depended on adoption of the law, and this condition was fulfilled. So we are receiving aid, but the law is not working. So it's a bad thing. It's a bad thing for cooperation with NATO and the partners. So it's an issue that needs to be fixed. Allow me to give floor, with your permission, to the representatives of private companies, and we have the head of the Association of Producers of Armaments. Dmitro, welcome. Now we are ready to listen to your thoughts and ideas. My last name is Umanets, Dmitro Umanets. That's my name. Okay, dear friends, dear colleagues. I apologize. You see, you mispronounced my name, and I get confused. But I'll fix it. Sorry about that. So, dear friends, dear colleagues, the thing is that, and I will focus my presentation not on the results of the private sector. I want to focus my presentation on the cooperation between the state and the private sector. And I think that that would be a better thing, a better approach. So, first and foremost, allow me to say just a few things about the background. Because before the war, the armed forces of Ukraine practically were neglected. No one needed them, and I'm taking full responsibility for what I say. Unfortunately, that was a problem. They were neglected. And the government should have started paying more attention and paying respect to the military. The government should have changed its attitude towards the armed forces. Unfortunately, nothing happened. And there were some changes. Some people are now in the trenches. That's the change. In the heat, wearing helmets, carrying weapons, and those weapons are not sufficient. And we're not giving them enough weapons. And then there are other people, and don't get offended. These people now organize good roundtables. So unfortunately, as Igor mentioned, the results are very small. There are lots of problems. And, the problems include lack of strategic planning, as mentioned here. And then I can also mention some other things. I can talk about how the planning is organized, but people already mentioned about it, and I don't want to repeat myself. So, what the private sector is concerned about, mostly? Well, mostly, to some extent, there is some kind of approximation. We're coming closer between the private sector and government enterprises. First and foremost, we're talking about government enterprises, but at the same time, they only declare things, they only talk, but they have little action. For instance, private companies, for them to work for the defense procurement program, they need to do some planning. They need to plan their work. And for this, they need to do some planning, not just for 6 months. They need to plan for a year at least. They need to plan for 2, maybe 3 years so that this enterprises could figure out what's what. They need to figure out what's happening with finances. They need to be able to plan and get advance payments. They need to be able to get advance payments from the state, because speaking about armored vests, 20 million, that's how much of investment is needed, and they cannot invest from their own pocket. So this is very important for the planning purposes, and that needs to be done by the Ministry of Strategies and the Ministry of Defense. They all have to take part. So I see that, Sergei, there is another problem here, and no one mentioned this problem. So in my view, they have, developed this Ministry of Strategic Industries, and some of the functions this ministry needed to be expanded. And we have this habit of getting more and more functions. But how do you do this? That's not easy. So to some extent, they are now trying to bargain about who gets which functions between the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Strategic Industries, right? And the former Minister of Defense has just confirmed that that's exactly what's happening. Then there is another problem which is looming. Sergei, and then your colleague from the Ukrainian Parliament, please pay attention to this, because this will turn into a tragedy, not a round table. We're talking about failure to implement defense procurement. And also, I wanted to emphasize other things. Those orders are implemented by the MOD in response to the needs of a very specific producer, right? So they already have a plan. They fix things behind the scenes, and off it goes. And I don't want to point fingers. I don't want to mention the boats and things like that, because you already know very well about that. So what is the main reason of this problem? How do we change the system? In my view, the main problem is about people and the leadership and the lack of good management. Things change. The leadership changed in the MOD, then the leadership changed in some other structures, and they established the Ministry of Strategy, Strategic Industries, but then there is no result. Why? And please, no offense, but people who come to work there, they oftentimes do not understand what needs to be done. And the president is kind of like that. He came from a totally different walk of life. So we are talking about mid-level management, and it is about any kind of structure, and specifically in the MOD. So these people used to work based on Soviet instructions and guidelines and laws and approaches, and they are still there. They are still using those Stalinist methods when the private company is not allowed to those offices. That's what's happening. And I do not want to again mention Stalin, Joseph Stalin, saying that personnel is about everything. But actually, personnel, human resource, is everything. Because we have accumulated so many problems over 30 years, over 7 years of the war. Why we have this many problems? Because no one was held liable for anything. No one was held liable for anything. So who do we ask the question? Why we're not getting any ammo? Who do you ask this question to? Why our soldiers still carry obsolete old AK rifles? So that is a problem. And Sergii, I think that's exactly the problem that needs to be addressed. Right. That needs to be raised up to the national level. Right. So you kind of stirred up this discussion, and already we have a few people who want to respond to things you mentioned. So you said that the main problem or the main reason for this problem are people, and I agree. So now you are saying, what's the use of these roundtables? Actually, there is use, because we are discussing problems. We are highlighting problems for the public. Public doesn't know much about this, because usually the public is really far away from this agenda, specifically from the agenda of the armed forces of Ukraine and what's happening in this organization. We have also a representative from a charitable fund for volunteers, which is called Pereverziev, Come Back Alive. And back in those days when times were difficult, volunteers were helping very much. And the volunteers were acting as whistleblowers. They were uncovering problems in the MOD and in the armed forces, and they were impacting personnel policy. They presented demands for the MOD to change people. And as far as I remember, one of the top-ranking officers lost his job. So we want the public to get information from us, and they get information because of these roundtables. If you are saying that the Ministry of Strategic Industries is not really coping with the task, so let's then raise this question. Let's say that Pereverziev needs to be replaced. If you are saying that the Minister of Defense is bad, and the procurement program is not working, so let's just openly say that Minister Taran is not coping with his functions. And the commander-in-chief, he probably needs to know that a certain minister needs to go. If it's about just two ministries, the MOD and the Ministry of Strategic Industries, and they're not coping. And when you're saying, as a representative of private producers, you're saying that it's very hard to work with those agencies, then I guess you need other people for good communication and for good streamlined operations. And I'm going to have a question for the representative of the charitable fund for the veterans. So you keep saying that you are staying away from politics, you're non-partisan, but you keep pushing this idea of changes in the ministries in terms of personnel. So now you have the floor, please. Allow me to just mention some statistics. Speaking about the defense program for last year, 36% belong to government enterprises, then 10% belongs to import, and 54% are private companies, suppliers of military equipment and arms for the needs of the armed forces of Ukraine. So 54%. That is why our task is to step up our share, and we will see who is doing a better job. And let's transition to another question. I agree fully that it all depends on the management and on the rules of the game. A year and a half ago, in Ukroboronprom, we have introduced this procedure whereby the entire leadership, all the directors of enterprises, they all undergo polygraph testing, and they are asked many questions. Questions about corruption and fighting corruption, then they are asked questions about the conflict of interest, and questions that have to do with cooperation with intelligence, not Ukrainian, but other intelligence agencies. And I'm going to tell you this, about 60 people failed polygraph test, and they lost their jobs in Ukroboronprom. So the same approach can be implemented in government structures, because sometimes I develop this impression that it's either they intentionally break things or because they're not smart. Maybe we are talking about specific saboteurs who block things from happening, because it's June, and in June the procurement program is still not working. And I just got a question about Ukroboronprom and the Artem company. So together with a few private companies from Canada and other Western countries, they agreed to produce ammunition, but there is information that these private companies are on the verge of bankruptcy. Right, this contract was not signed. They signed just a memorandum. And in line with this memorandum, by July 1st, the Canadians are supposed to provide the feasibility study for this production of ammunition, of small caliber ammunition. And when they do this, we will be talking about the process of incorporation. What kind of company we're going to have, a joint enterprise or some other type of incorporation. So there are intentions. And one of the key factors for this agreement says that we are talking about investment from Canada into Ukraine. And Ukraine is not using a penny from public funds in this project. Ukraine is offering land, buildings, and Ukrainian staff, workers, but this investment is foreign. When the feasibility study is ready, we will be able to see that this is feasible, and it will cover the needs of the armed forces of Ukraine, because right now we are importing ammunition for small arms. So then we will make a decision what to do next. Okay, thank you so much. And we're going to ask Andrii to say a few things. Andrii, you had a comment about what Metro was saying. Right. Thank you so much. Look, the question is not about the president. The president, of course, cannot be an expert in everything, and that is obvious. And it's a very complicated thing by itself. But the point is that it's a system which exists. And how do we form the prices? And people mentioned that. That is one of the discouraging factors for private producers. They don't want to become a part of this process. You see, the procurement program has no transparency in terms of decision-making. It's not just a classified document, and it's top secret, actually, And the secrecy is actually acting against the intentions of the state, because it's a lengthy process. This document goes through different agencies, and all the journalists already have this information. They make it public, but the government cannot make comments, because if you make comments about this document, you kind of violate the law on the state secret. So NATO has this principle, what's considered secret and what's not. And one of these principles says that, how feasible it is for you to keep it secret. If you cannot keep this document secret, then it makes no sense making it classified. Well, the key question is about lack of transparency of decision-making. For instance, when they are talking about this producer or that producer, and there are no objective criteria to say why you chose this producer instead of that. And then the MOD receives requests from the armed forces, and they specifically mention producers, specific companies. And all the private manufacturers, they have to negotiate, they have to persuade and talk and explain it's not a market-based mechanism. The law is giving us a different framework, which also needs to be worked on. So it makes process streamlined, and until this process is streamlined, we will have problems. And I agree with the Stalinist approaches, because actually this approach was designed in 1930s. So before all these problems are resolved, we will have problems. Right. And it's important also to ask one of the co-organizers. Allow me to just use 1 second of your time. And I did not talk about some specific, personnel problems. I'm talking about the problem with the system. Over 30 years, nothing changed. That is a huge problem. Artur Pereverziev, who represents the reform project in defense procurement. Right, so a lot of things have been mentioned before me. And I had to leave this room for a few minutes, but I'd like to quickly discuss why we're here. Because the initial objective was to discuss all the problems, all the questions, because we have so many from so many areas. So we have to be on one page, and we have to work on the reform agenda in defense procurement, because as we all have seen, the ministry and the government cannot pick up this role of an agenda-setting entity. So we are talking about developments, drafting of the law, so they did it and they handed it over. So we understand that the law is too big and it's very hard to implement such a law. And then we said, of course, let's make it a framework document and let's have some bylaws and regulations. And that's how we will continue the reform without overloading ourselves with additional work. And it's a Western approach, and Ukraine is trying to become a country that uses Western approaches. And for 8 months, we were supposed to have already this resolution in place. And they extended the development process until January, then it was May, and it took them 8 months, and during 8 months you could have accomplished a lot of things. So there was a delay, 4-month delay in the process, and then at the end we have those regulations, which are just a continuation of the procurement program. They continue regulation in specific areas. So 8 months were spent to make things that already were made before. So then price formation, the pricing, it's critical for producers. And those provisions that have direct effect, they, have to be very, very precise, prohibiting using Soviet approaches in procurement. And if you select one vendor, then they're going to use the same scheme in terms of pricing and in terms of profit generation, where you cannot accumulate any capital and you cannot develop. So you need to be able to not just recover the costs, you need to spend some money for development. And Ukroboronprom is trying to do this, but you gotta have the resource for development. And private companies cannot export their products like Ukroboronprom is doing. So, as you mentioned, that resolution that can delay the effect of the law, well, I did not see the text, but it's a huge conflict, legal conflict, because a resolution cannot delay the law, right? To delay a law, you have to adopt another law, but I don't see how it can happen, because we already passed all the transition periods. And what's changed? Nothing changed. The actors didn't change, the problem didn't change. Also, there is another problem, and we already discussed it, low quality of resolution. And they still never allowed to organize procurements through the register. And with the register, the situation is very interesting, because back in the day, they said, when the product is ready, you make this decision, you sign the resolution, and then you mandate to use the register. So how they did it in Ukraine, they failed to come up with a product, they signed the resolution, they affected the law, but you cannot still use the register. No one said that, okay, we can establish an interim process, how to act before the product is established. And right now, they say that this institute is on the verge of bankruptcy, it cannot function, and they request to bring information on paper. So nothing has changed. Right, and one of the tasks for this roundtable is to discuss all of these problems as a system. And of course, you can discuss personnel issues, and there is one ministry, the Ministry of Strategic Industries. And in the law, we did not foresee giving them a lot of powers, and they tried to get those powers, but it's a huge problem. And maybe it's not really a question for the minister or vice prime minister, it's a question to the ministry and the powers of the ministry, and whether this ministry starts blocking all the processes. And then there is another risk, a major risk, in the context of the resolutions mentioned just now. So, in the process of a negotiation with other agencies, they talk about mobilization contracts and the process of signing of such contracts, and they want to remove those contracts from the law. And then that means that they cannot implement the law, and they want to manually organize things. They just call a manufacturer and they say, well, you just do what you need to do without any competitive process, without any transparent procedures. And in this case, we have to pay very close attention to what's happening. And then there was another question, what kind of results we want to achieve and what it takes to achieve those results. We as NGOs, we've been analyzing the processes and we are making recommendations about implementing the law, what needs to be done about this. And we have already some proposals how we can do better. We have an expert group that is working on recommendations because we want to respond very quickly to things. There was this very important question which is in the process of discussion while we are talking about this. So it's about the green plans. The MOD is submitting annual procurement plans for the committee, and they are announcing some of the procedures even before they send them for agreement. And 2 contracts were already signed based on those plans that they sent to the committee. The Ministry of Defense promised to cancel the procedures. They kind of started the process, but the situation is bad. It took too much time. And the MOD procurement right now is only 45% from the entire procurement from the last year. So there is a huge risk of failure, and they will need a lot of people to implement all the requests. So then no one asked MOD to use open bidding. They didn't do this. And they feared to do this because there was some legal uncertainty in this field. And right now we are trying to advocate changes in the legislation to agree all the planning issues so that in the very beginning we could agree on the 30-month plan, and then we will have to offload some of the work from the ministry. And then there is another problem, the problem of transparency and secrecy. And a lot's been discussed, how bad that is and how inappropriate it is. Because again, we are saying that this plan, the procurement plan is secret, and all the procurement processes are classified. But then at some point, they would speak to the media and show everything, and you could actually calculate what's been supplied. So only, in fact, they did not disclose information about how much funds were spent and who was the implementing entity. But other than that, the enemy could have learned all the information without any effort. But there are risks, and then there is harm for defense capability. And you just should recall the latest cases, and I don't want to mention some cases from previous investigations conducted by journalists. You know, this Zvin system, remember, for the armed forces. It's a very important system. They spent 600 million hryvnia, and now that system is not working. It cannot be installed, and you cannot really return it because it's about hardware. How they chose that implementing entity and why, that is a very good question. And we need to have some bylaws and regulations for procurement of new technology, because the armed forces of NATO member states, they put forward the priority task of high-tech development, because no one is going to fight with people. They want to fight with technology. So, and that's what we are supposed to do. And I stepped out just for a second, but I'm, gonna tell you this. We are now working on the establishment of a council, expert council, and hopefully it that would become another tool of impacting the work of the ministry, because they are now still using a closed mode of operations with a strict hierarchy, and then there is no format to discuss problems, and the problems can become critical very quickly. And in fact, we see that 6 months have passed, and we are still not moving anywhere, and nobody can tell us when this register will be working. So right now we have a situation where, on one hand, we have this legal gaps, and the new resolution doesn't have any products, and they are referring the old register and the old law, and now we have two registers, nobody knows how to use them, because, the old law is no longer in effect. So who is now responsible for forming the policy in this regard? So, and I wanted to mention one more thing. You mentioned ammo. I just want to say that when we were in the Ministry of Defense back in 2015, there was this very big process of negotiations with NATO and NATO trust funds, and they had this initiative to build an ammunition factory. And the NSDC successfully stopped this process, but I think we can revisit this issue. And I'm just, using the opportunity to remind you that we have NATO as a very good partner, and we have to engage them very actively so that they could help us in doing this kind of work. And we have this problem of procurement and imports, and we were trying to make sure that we could use NATO logistic agencies, and we already have some requests in jamming devices for the drones. So when we want to buy something lethal, we have to face, a lot of bureaucracy. And those are the nuances that stand in the way. So it's a problem. We have to address it comprehensively, because, we need to be able to develop our capabilities. We cannot just be dependent on the domestic market. So to finalize this, we have to ask ourselves what we can do next. And it's a huge problem, because right now we're talking about the law, and there are a lot of other questions which we have to address institutionally. So we already have some developments, and Andrii already mentioned the report. Yeah, right. I did not mention the report. I just want to mention it. So there is a huge amount of work that needs to be done in the ministries, in terms of regulations, so that we could fix the mistakes, and so that we could establish a way forward, because we cannot discuss effective use of legislation, we cannot discuss effective procurement in the ministry until we have good project management, until we have risk management, and until we have marketing research. And we have to have a good process of introducing innovations. And then there is a problem of quality. We did not mention it, but we have problems with quality. And the system of quality control is built on the basis of post-war Europe. They were controllers, and they were working at government enterprises and controlling everything. We abandoned this system a long time ago. Now they have this new NATO standard of quality assurance. And the situation is really anecdotal. About 1 year ago, in March 2020, the government already had a resolution which was supposed to launch a procedure of quality assurance. Then the government changed. They started reviewing this document, and this document is under review since then. And constantly we have new procedures issued by the cabinet, and it's been already 17 revisions. And right now they are going to review this document again in the cabinet. So allow me to just address everybody who knows about this topic. So please support this situation, because it's critical. And this law allows us to use the quality assurance tools, but that requires further regulation. That's pretty much it. Right. I think that there will be questions. And I apologize. I started, but I did not finish my presentation. The problem of secrecy and classified status in the transition revisions of the law, they spoke about transparency and transparency of procurement of military equipment, but there was this technical mistake, and these norms were mentioned in a different part of the law, so they allow to make even more things classified. Now there are some open public procedures, and these changes in the law, they make things complicated. They complicate procurement of fuel, and again, we have this legal conflict with different norms of the law. Changes were prepared, and right now, we have to amend the state secret law so that we would not be classifying subsequent contracts. We want to make sure that there is a good process for making contracts unclassified. So they have to establish an interagency commission, and we have to unclassify contracts which expired, so analysis had to be made. And that's very important. Andrii spoke about NATO and the defense procurement law and the assistance that they give us. And then there is another question. How do we reduce the secrecy? Right. I think it's about 20%, right? Well, they say it's between 15 to 20%. Right. I support fully that we have to declassify as much as we can all these contracts, because we, with colleagues, were buying things, the jamming rifles for drones, for different units, and we were paying 15,000 euro per piece. Now, they are talking about buying similar jamming rifles, which cost $30,000. And I have a question. So why? Why they have this increase in price? During year 8 of the war, our snipers are making ammo themselves, and that's a shame for the country. So can you please tell us more about your initiatives of your veteran foundation?
Від описаної проблеми ні, але я хотів підняти інше питання коротко, яке сьогодні не обговорювали, це про пріоритизацію в закупівлях.
So let's discuss procurement.
Те, що потрібно сьогодні для війни, те, що от прямо сьогодні, зараз, для тих військових, які в окопі з автоматом.
So speaking about the military, like you just said, or like Metro said, and the military and the obsolete rifles that they carry. So the conflict with Russia can escalate, and right now more than 60% of thermal vision devices are procured by volunteers, and Pereverziev Foundation provided those thermal vision devices. And we are not talking about military equipment, we're talking about Pulsar made in Russia, Belarus, and Lithuania. We'll remember them very well, we all were buying them. So then, speaking about the drones, they use some American, some European models, and they are procured and retrofitted as strike drones. And they work every day. They do reconnaissance at the level of company and battalion. So most of the vehicles that are used for transporting personnel, they are private vehicles or vehicles provided by volunteers. And only this year, we started providing jamming devices to jam Phantom Mavics. And we are not talking about we're not talking about other kinds of drones because there are so many used and none of them were shut down. Those are the needs for today. So we need those jammers. And no one's talking about this. We are buying something and we are spending a lot of public funds for something, but we are not addressing problems which are present. And then there is another category, things that we need to fight the war of tomorrow. And you have seen the situation yesterday with the British destroyer. Had they had an actual combat situation, Ukraine would not be able to help. We do not have any good acoustic devices. We cannot have any. We don't have any capability of fighting war at sea. And without any discussions, without any announcements, without any transparency, the government is about to sign a contract to buy Turkish corvettes. They are not announcing any information about the weapons that they carry. And I have a question for Victor. How did that happen? In spite of the fact that there was a development program in place for Navy, we somehow decided to spend a lot of money from public procurement program to buy corvettes. We are buying transport aircraft from Antonov company. And at the same time, our combat aviation, Mi-29 and other aircraft, they are quite obsolete and they won't be able to fight modern-day Russian aircraft. The state is buying what they need, or the state is buying what they can buy. Where is the answer? And I have a question for Victor about Corvette. Please turn on the mic. Microphone, please. Speaking about all these issues that were raised, we are ready to provide information separately, upon request. Separately from whom? Well, you just have to send us a separate request, and then we will provide you a clear answer. But can you receive an oral request from a citizen of Ukraine? Well, we have a procedure that we are supposed to follow, so you're not ready to give me the answer. Right, okay, I heard you. Thank you so much. Taras, I'm going to ask you to do the same. So that information needs to be sent to us on paper. I'm noting down all the questions and we will be able to provide you the answer. But it's best to have cooperation more formal, right? It needs to be documented because we were not preparing ourselves for this. And the question about giving help to the British destroyer, we are not Navy commanders. We're not commanders of operations. We cannot really answer that question. But if you send us written requests, then, of course, we will give you written answers. These questions are very important for the public. And we are also citizens of Ukraine, and these questions are very important for us, too. Right. So the information will be provided upon request. Thank you, dear MOD representatives, for openness, for your assurances that you will provide the answers to questions that Taras was asking. Dear colleagues, thank you so much. Now, if you want to ask questions to the MOD, to the experts, to the committee of the Parliament, then please go ahead. I'm a communications manager, and I represent the core organizer. And I have a question for Mr. Costenka and the representatives of the Ministry of Defense. Artur mentioned that they plan to establish an expert working group at the parliamentary committee, where you could formally present your stance, where you could discuss recommendations. So the objective of this roundtable is to have a good constructive dialogue. And I have a question for Mr. Kostenka. What do you think about this working group? Is it appropriate? and how we can develop this working group so that it is functional. And I have a question to the MOD. What do you think? Do you think this proposal is effective? Do you think it's constructive? And will you send a representative from the MOD to work in this working group if it's created? Okay, thank you so much. And thank you for your question. I'm gonna mention the cooperation that we have. When this bill was adopted, I remember Artur was helping very much. And of course, we support any kind of communication. And when we work with veterans of special services, we now, by the way, work on the SBU law. And we want the specialists to take part in all of these working groups. So let's discuss. Let's talk about the information that can be provided to the committee. The committee is always getting information from NAKO organization, from other specialists and experts. So if this is about the working group, let's discuss the format. What do you think is a good format? And then we will discuss it at the committee. I am for this. I don't see this as a problem. And let us know what kind of information you will be providing to the committee and for which purpose. Let's cooperate. I support. The Ministry of Defense, I hope, is okay. Yes, we are in support of cooperation with the experts in the MOD right now. Is being reformed very quickly, as you know. We have 10 reform projects which we are supposed to complete. And then the next year is supposed to be a pilot year for implementing these things. So we have to have expert assistance from the community, from the experts. And whether this group is possible at the committee level, well, Roman knows better because there are rules of procedure, there are other things that you have to decide. And the Ministry of Defense will be able to join. Right. What about secrecy? Make sure that the secrecy is observed, because you will be discussing a lot of secret information at the committee. And in this committee, you have a representative from the party of Putin's relative. Right, but that MP has no access to classified information. Right, and there was this case when one MP, I think his last name is Kavlo, was helping riot police to destroy all the evidence. Right, so we have one MP in the committee who represents a party, and the head of the party is a relative of Putin. So, those are our recommendations, to establish an expert working group, and that is one of the results of today's dialogue. I understand that it's going to help the committee. So, with all due respect, please get advice from the experts and do not neglect this opportunity.
Конструктивному ключі, тому що ми так, знаєте, перелікували всякі проблеми і, по-перше, комітет завжди допомагав нам, вони дійсно постійно співпрацювали в рамках групи. Закон, який був напрацьований, він працював реально в приміщенні комітету, вони кожен день там, я декілька разів відвідував там, так, і я знаю, що це, робота йшла. Так само зараз іде робота над деякими новими нормативними актами, новими законами, але ж проблема не в цьому, проблема в підзаконних актах. Тобто важелі впливу комітету на рівні підзаконних нормативних актів, вони дуже обмежені. Максимум, що вони можуть зробити, викликати міністра, і причому він не обов'язково має приходити, а можуть викликати прем'єр-міністра і попросити його там щось зробити. І от, власно кажучи, тобто тут, якщо комітет може допомогти якимось чином просунути ідею все ж таки впровадження закону так, як він є, самого духу закону в цю нормативку, це буде здорово.